So those are coming up. It's important to know the equipment that you have installed in your facility and understand the life cycle of that equipment. In doing so, we have what's called the Rockwell Automation Installed Base Evaluation, IBE, which is a structured methodology to coming into your factory, looking at all your panels, understanding the life cycle of all the components in the panels, producing a report that shows you what has been discontinued, how many spares you have on hand, how many spares you need to support the products. So this is a very good service. I would look for you to at least take into consideration to do your own service in your facility, understand what is there, understand the life cycle, understand what it's going to be take support. But if you want a structured service, Rockwell Automation does offer the installed base evaluation. So please speak to any of your local distributor specialists or salespeople about that. There's in understanding the life cycle of the products, I would invite you to Google Rockwell Lifecycle status and add this product lifecycle web page to your favorites in your web browser. I go to this lifecycle web page probably 4 times a day when I'm looking at products as I have discussions with customers. So that's the product lifecycle status. As an example, I brought that up and I plugged in the 1756 L55, and then you see in the lower right-hand corner the results that I get from this. It says that the L55 was discontinued in March of 2011, and it shows the various L55s. In addition, if you look to the left, in the lower left of this screen, you see where it says life cycle definitions. And the top life cycle definition is active. That means that that is the most current product available, and it is available for resale. Then there's active mature. Active mature is available for sale as new product, but there are other products that are more current, and you might gain value by going to those newer products. And then there's end of life, which is an announcement that a product is going to be discontinued, and there will be a last time to buy date associated with the end of life. And then from the end of life, it goes into discontinued. Once it goes into discontinued, then the products are not offered for sale as new. But we can still get you those products. They are still supported. So discontinued products continue to be supported. So the fact that a product has been discontinued does not mean that it is not supported. It is still supported. And what does it mean to be supported? It means that we can still get firmware for the discontinued product. We can still call up Tech Connect and have and talk to a support engineer about that product. We can download programming software for that product, and we can, if you just have to have one, we can have one on your doorstep. In certain cases, availability is taken into consideration, but through the exchange services, we could have a new product on your doorstep the next morning, or a remanufactured version of the discontinued product on your doorstep the next morning. In addition, we can get the discontinued product repaired. So we can download firmware, we can download software, we can talk to engineers, we can get discontinued product repaired, we can get discontinued product in remanufactured format delivered to your doorstep priority next morning. So the discontinued products are supported. The ControlLogix L5x processor was discontinued in 2011. That was 9 years ago, and we can still download firmware for that. We see here that the L5 is still available through the exchange service, which means we can have one on your doorstep the next morning for the L5, M12, M13, M14, and so forth. And we can get all of them repaired. So I wanted everybody to understand that discontinued products do not mean that the products are not supported. They are still supported. Here is a history of the ControlLogix 1756 ControlLogix processors and their family. I put this together going and looking at what firmware was available. I've been doing this for about 20 years, so I had some insight as the processor history. But here we've got the L1 processor, and it was introduced in 1999, and with processor firmwares 4 through version 13. So the L1 will only handle version 13 firmware at the most recent. Then we had the the L53, which is a processor that came out, and it was a fixed memory processor. The L55 had expansion memory in it, but the L53 did not, and that would take us up to version 11 firmware. Then we had the L60 MO3. That was a fixed memory processor for the L60. And that also had, it was a dual slot processor and 3-axis Circos motion module. That was introduced 2007. That would go take us up to version 17 firmware. Then the L60 processor came out, the L6 processor, L61, 62, and so forth, came out in roughly 2005. And version 2019 or 20.019 firmware is available for the L6 processor. So highlighted the firmwares that are available. Of all these legacy processors, version 16.023 is available for the L55 processor still. The earlier revisions are not, they've been retired, but version 16.023 is still available for the L55 processor. And version 20.019 is still available for the L6 processor. Version 20 is special firmware. Version 20 firmware will be available for the foreseeable future. That is the threshold firmware. That divides the old RSLogix 5000 hardware and programming software from the Studio 5000 newer hardware and programming software. So version 20 will be with us for quite a while. Anything version 20 and below is programmed with RSLogix 5000. Version 21 and above is programmed with Studio 5000. So version 16.023 and 20.019 firmware is still available, and those will be available and with us for some time, especially the 20.019 firmware. There's a lot of hardware out there. There's a lot of L55s out there, and there's a lot of L6 processors out there running still. They will be supported in the future. For new applications, though, we would not use those processors. We would go with either the L7 or the L8 processors, and those take us up to the current firmware, which is version 32 of the programming firmware. So I told you about the Rockwell Lifecycle webpage, and please Google that webpage. We also have the second important webpage is the Product Compatibility and Download Center webpage. This is where we get our firmware and also our programming software downloads from this webpage. You can either go to this web link, or once again, you can Google Rockwell Product Compatibility and Download Center, and it'll take you to this web page. So here, as an example, I went to the Product Compatibility web page, and I typed in 1756-L, and it brought up several 1756 bulletin processors, including the L1. Now, the L1 is a processor that came out in 1999, which is over 20 years ago. And it shows that version 13 is the highest firmware that we can download for the L1. And that version 13 firmware is shown to have a status of limited. And if we look at the limited definition, it says it's still available, you can download it. It is not a firmware that has a priority for anomaly resolutions, but it is still available. It is what it is. If you look at the top, it says preferred firmware. That's obvious to what that is. That's firmware that's readily available, and we prefer that you operate on that firmware. And then there's managed firmware. It's firmware that is a priority for addressing anomalies. It's still available, of course. The limited firmware is still available. It's not a priority for addressing anomalies. But the retired firmware is not available for general consumption. If you just absolutely positively have to have some retired firmware, then please contact us, and perhaps we can get that for you. That would be in the case of validated processes, like in pharmaceutical or consumer products, where processes are validated, and you just absolutely positively have to have that retired firmware. We can dig that up. So we do support that. In addition, the Product Compatibility and Download Center is the site where we go to get the latest revisions of our programming software. And here I just went to that site and I typed in RSLogix, and then it came back and it showed me several RSLogix programs, RSLogix 5, RSLogix 500. I selected RSLogix 5000, and to the right it shows all of the revisions of RSLogix 5000. You look at the top and it says 20.05 revision is a managed revision. So it is still being addressed. 20.05 is still being addressed. It was most recently brought up to be compatible with Windows 10. And it is what we call a major release of firmware, meaning that anomalies in that firmware or the programming software, or as new operating systems come out, then version 20 of RSLogix 5000 will be targeted for determining or for testing for compatibility with that new operating system, whatever that is. So version 20 will be with us for a while. Version 16, on the other hand, may not. So RSLogix 5000, the difference between RSLogix 5000 and Studio 5000. So this is a story about hardware as well as software. It's not just a story about software. So roughly in the year 2013, RFLogix 5000 became Studio 5000 with the release of version 21 of the firmware. Before that, we had version 20 of the firmware. We had the L5 and the L6 processors. Of course, the L5s can only be flashed up to version 16 firmware, but the L6 processors can be flashed to version 20 of the firmware. But the L5 and the L6 processors, they had limited capability. And what I mean by that is you purchase them by the user memory, and that's all they had in them. They were a single core, they had a single core microprocessor in them, running a single machine cycle. So things like communications, the machine cycle had to be interrupted, and so that the single core microprocessor could work on communications, and that's what we called a communication time slice. So the program scan would be interrupted, and the communication time slice would take care of the communications. That's not true in the new L8 processor. The new L8 processor is a quad-core processor. In addition to that, it takes on more memory. So there's other memory in the L7 and the L8 processors. There's more memory than just what the memory that you purchase as user memory. There's other memory in these processors, and that other memory is going to take on functionality, and that functionality is coming from Studio 5000. So just to recap the L6 processor, when we downloaded a program to the L6 processor, what we actually downloaded was a compiled version of the project, of the ACD project. So the ACD file is not downloaded to the L6 processor. What is downloaded is the compilation of the ACD file. And so and that is downloaded into program memory of the L6 controller. Now, also in the L6 controller, what is occupying memory? If you buy a 1 meg L6 controller, you don't get all 1 meg because some of that 1 meg of user memory is being used by the operating system for the controller. So you don't get the full 1 meg. So when you downloaded the compilation of the ACD project to the L6 controller, you did not download any comments or descriptions. None of that went with it. So when you did an upload of that program, the only thing you got was the undocumented project file. You get the project file, you get the tag names, you get all that, but you wouldn't get any comments or descriptions. And the reason for that, that was a function of the capability of the L5 and the L6 controllers. They only had user memory. They did not have any other memory to store that information. With the introduction of the L7 controller came, the L7 was fitted with other memory, additional non-volatile extended memory. And that gave us the ability for a lot of other functions. Some of those functions have come out, and some of the functions have not at this point. For instance, with version 21, we could download a project to the L7 controller, and it would download all the comments and descriptions to the L7. Now, those comments and descriptions are not, they do not occupy user memory, volatile RAM. What they do occupy is the other memory of the L7 processor. So the user memory is not impacted by the comments and descriptions being downloaded to the L7. In addition, The L7 would handle an alarm log. It'd take up to 10,000 alarms, so that those the new memory would handle the alarm log for the L7. And version 21 gave us extended tag properties, where we could provide extended tag properties to an integer, for instance, an integer tag. Those extended tag properties, maybe the integer tag would tell us what the level in the tank is. The extended tag properties would tell us the tank name, the high level, the high level, the low low level. And so all of those extended tag properties would reside in the other memory. They would not reside in the user memory. They would not impact the user memory of the L7 controller. So that's what the other memory does. It's completely independent of the user memory space in the controller. Now the ControlLogix 5580 is a generation above the L7 controller. It came out roughly in 2017, and it has in it a quad-core microprocessor. So the L7, like the L5 and the L6, had the L7, L5, and L6 has a single core microprocessor. And the L8 is the first one with a multi-core microprocessor. Now the quad-core processor in the L8 handles other services. For instance, one of the cores handles the program scan. The communications is offloaded to another core. So you can imagine that the communications in the L8 processor is much faster than the communications in the L7, L5, or L6. The L7, L5, or L6 have to interrupt their program scan to handle communications, and the L8 can handle communications asynchronous. So these are truly process controllers. The word PLC does not apply here. This is a true process controller, the L8. It's fitted with gigabit Ethernet port, high-speed communication, asynchronous I/O communications. This processor is benchmarked between 12 and 20 times faster than an L7. Now the L7 was benchmarked at about 5 to 7 times faster than an L6. And the L6 was benchmarked at about 4 times faster than the L5. So, you know, if you're looking at from the L6 to the L8, you've got a tremendous speed in program scan times and also communication times difference from the L6. This is a different architecture from the L6. So it only makes sense that we cannot just take a project that is configured with the L6 and simply change the processor to the 5580, because that conversion will not do justice to the project. There will be compromises made in the program during that conversion, and that's what this discussion is about. It's about how to take projects from the legacy processors to the new generation of controllers. In this case, the ControlLogix 5580. It is a very high performance controller. In addition to that, the 5580 has enhanced security. It's got digitally encrypted firmware. So the firmware can only come from Rockwell Automation. It's encrypted at Rockwell Automation. If if someone tries to download firmware that is from a nefarious source, they will not be able to do it to the ControlLogix 5580. As a matter of fact, you cannot do it with the 5570 L7 processor. Its firmware is also encrypted as well. This processor has controller-based change detection in it. So this processor logs changes in the controller, and those changes can be accessed by sending a message to the controller and writing those changes to the SD card. So if somebody comes up and makes changes to the processor, we can write a message to the processor and we can extract those changes. I would also advise people to look at FactoryTalk Asset Center, which is a system that provides comprehensive change detection and audit capability. Who did what, from where. Most of the security issues are not issues that are handled that are initiated from outside of facility. They're actually issues that initiated from inside of the facility. Somebody downloading a program to a processor, that program is out of date. Programs being held on multiple laptops, that's where the security issue, most security issues happen in manufacturing organizations, not from the outside world. So I would invite everybody to look at FactoryTalk Asset Center, which is our asset manager for Rockwell automation products. So if we're migrating from the L5 and the L6 and even the L7 processor to the 5580, we have to take into consideration the differences in the architectures. And I wanted to highlight a few of these differences, and I want to direct your attention to the Migration Reference Manual, publication 1756 RM100. I did not include the revision letter on that publication. You may look at this at a later point in time. So I wanted you to have the latest revision. You could just Google, and this is what I do. I just Google the publication number 1756-RM100, and you'll be presented with this Migration Reference Manual, replacement guidelines, logic controllers, replacement from the 5570 to the 5580. So this would apply to the 5550 and the 5560 processors as well, moving them to the 5580. So I want to highlight a couple of items that are mentioned. A lot of the migration is not intuitive. In other words, I just can't look at it and imagine the problems that I'd be confronted with the migration. Will it work if we just go up and change the processor in a 5560 to a 5580? Will it work? Yes, it will work, but it's not really the right way to do it. And I highly encourage you to look this up when you do this migration. So there's a couple of changes that are not intuitive. One is there was a change in the chassis. So the 5580 has it puts out more power than the 5550 or the 5560 processors. So if we're going to change it, this migration manual points out that if we're going to maintain the 140°F temperature rating of the processor, then we need to use the Series C chassis for this migration. In addition, we need to use the latest revision of Studio 5000 Logix Designer. Today, that is version 32 firmware. It would be for the version 32 of the Logix 5000 Designer software. So that Series C chassis is important to to look up. You can use a Series B chassis, but it would be derated to 122 degree Fahrenheit, which may or may not be a problem for you. Another item that is really not intuitive, a lot of in the past when we wanted to change from one processor to another processor, we just go to the controller properties and we pull down the next processor and we upgrade it. And RSLogix 5000 would go through its paces and it would upgrade that processor. But we don't want to do that here because the architecture of the L8 is so different from the architecture of the L5 and the L6. What we want to do is create a new project with the L8 processor in it. That would be the beginning. And then we would, from the old L5 or L6 project, RSLogix 5000 project, we would export the L5K file from the old project. And then we would import that L5K file that we extracted from the old project. We would import that into the new ControlLogix 5580 project that we just created. So when we create the project with the new L8 processor in it, what that does is it organizes the internal memory structures to the way that they need to be. The deal is that the architectures are so different, you need to give the project an opportunity to do that. So they recommend importing the L5K file. In addition to that, you can import any runs or routines or programs or whatever, or UDTs or whatever, into the new project as well. So don't just change the controller. Now, I said that the ControlLogix 5580 has a multi-core microprocessor in it, and it got rid of the system overhead time slice because the system overhead time slice is handled by a separate core in the 5580. In addition to that, there is a parameter for the report overflow faults, and there are procedures for gathering those math overflow faults from the 5580. That procedure is documented in this migration manual. Now, the third thing that I wanted to highlight in the migration manual is this little note here, because I get calls from it. We have customers who use third-party products for their HMIs, and they have third-party communication software that are addressing this, in this case, mostly legacy processors. So I get the telephone call from the customers and they say, hey man, we're running with this, this L55 processor and we threw an L8 processor in, and now our third-party communication software will not communicate with an L8. I sure wish you would have told me about this before we bought the L8. And I say, now wait a minute, this is all documented. The L8 uses a new implementation of the ANSI extended symbolic CIP protocol. It is documented. What you need to do is have your communication drivers updated. Your communication software vendor is well aware of these updates, and no doubt they have new communication drivers. So my point is, please consider before you upgrade to the L8 that you're probably also going to have to also upgrade the communication drivers if you have any third-party software communicating to these processors. So I wanted to make sure that you're aware of the migration reference manual. In summary, the L55 and the L60 processors are still supported. They're discontinued. They can't buy them, but they are still supported. You can have one from our Exchange Hub delivered to you the next day. If they do deliver you an Exchange processor, please take note that you've got to take your old processor and put it in the box and ship it back. So you take the Exchange processor out of the box and you put your old processor in it. The new processor comes with a 2-year warranty. It's remanufactured. You can still download software and firmware for the L5 and the L6 processors. Take note and please Google Rockwell Lifecycle webpage and go through your facility. And if you have questions about whether or not a product is still available, or what is the product life cycle of the SLIC processor, please take that over to the Rockwell Lifecycle webpage. It'll very quickly tell you that SLC processors are active mature, although a few of them have been discontinued, but the majority of them are active mature. You also use the product compatibility and download center for downloading firmware and software. And please refer to the reference manual 1756 RM100 when migrating the L5, L6, or the L7 to the ControlLogix 5580. So I appreciate everybody that attended this. Please contact me or your product specialist in your area. We've got a lot of product specialists in the rentals company, and we've got a large depth of Rockwell technical consultants in our area that can answer any questions you may have. It's always good to consider what you're going to do. Planning doesn't cost money, and it saves time in the future. We will be happy to come up with a budget, help you come up with a budget for any projects you may have in the future. But thank you for attending, and hope to see you again in one of our Tech Talks. Thank you very much.